This is stage 16. That's Dexter's apartment. This is where Dexter kept his blood slides. This studio has been my home for more than a decade. 5 seasons of 6 Feet Under and 8 of Dexter. But now, it's all coming to an end. They're breaking down the sets. The world of Dexter is evaporating. See, people are taking things already. One of these 4. Somebody snagged it. I don't think Dexter is particularly preoccupied with environmental issues, to be honest. He puts a lot of fuel in his boat, puts a lot of miles on that boat. I'm talking about it like it's real life, which is kind of how it started to feel. Hair and makeup. Being Dexterized means wearing brighter colors than I would ever wear, and being vaguely Oompa Loompa in my complexion. Inside the air-conditioned, airbrushed world of Hollywood, climate change isn't something you have to think about too much, unless you really want to. But I know I'm living in a bubble, and I know there are places outside my bubble where climate change is impossible to ignore. At the top of that list is Bangladesh, where I've heard that climate change is a matter of life and death.
This heat wave is just baking Southern California with
We probably are going to break some records in some of the warmer coastal...
Get ready for another heat wave. It's threatening to bring record temperatures to the area.
Triple-digit temperatures throughout much of the Southland. It's more than hot, it's dangerous. But our Angie
I've made a lot of movies here in Los Angeles. And recently I relocated here from New York. LA has seen its share of heat waves, but I've never given them much thought.
Based on the forecast, it now meets our criteria for a heat emergency.
But officials at all levels of government are becoming increasingly concerned about heat waves and are taking steps to prepare for them. From the local Office of Emergency Preparedness here in LA,
I recommend that based on this, we probably need to contact OEM and see about having them.
All the way to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta.
Dr. Shivayu Saha has some interesting data that we wanted to share and talk with you about heat trends in California. And,
I always thought the CDC just dealt with outbreaks like the avian flu or E. coli. But George Luber leads an entire department whose sole focus is global warming. And one of the biggest health concerns of global warming is heat waves.
You know, extreme heat in California really is projected to have serious health impacts, social impacts, economic impacts.
George's team is especially worried about cities like LA.
In areas where they currently experience heat waves, like LA County, the number and magnitude of heat wave days is going to increase dramatically.
George tells me that heat waves, which are prolonged spikes in temperature, bring with them all sorts of negative health consequences, some of them lethal.
How worried should we all be? Do you wake up worrying about this?
Yes, I do wake up in the middle of the night because I have young children and worried about a future world, the world that I read about from the climate models. But how do we get people to realize that this is a disaster unfolding? We don't have dead bodies on the sidewalk. We have people dying alone in their apartments. It's a slow-moving disaster.
A disaster that will be more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting as the planet warms. Is it possible the most dangerous thing about global warming is also the most obvious? The heat itself?
I first visited the Middle East as a teenager and fell in love with it. Eventually, I studied Arabic and made this part of the world a focus of my work as a reporter at the New York Times. In a region with no shortage of troubled countries, Yemen stands out as one of the most unstable. When I arrive, Yemen's president invites me to meet with him. He wants to talk about something that threatens to destabilize his country even more: water. How is the climate changing in Yemen? Is it drier? Does it rain as much? Does it rain harder?
الأمطار يعني شحيحة.
Rains are rare. It's becoming less.
تنزل بقوة هائلة.
And if there is rain, it is very strong and it is devastating, destructive.
لم نتعود هذا الطقس. كان من أول تجي الأمطار خفيفة.
We are not used to such climate. In the past, rain would be fair and it would continue for a week or a month, but it is fair rain.
And he's seen this change in his life, growing up here.
هذه في خلال ال5 سنوات.
It's the first time I see this. In my whole life, I did not witness such a thing.
Interesting. The president says that in some places, the water situation is so dire, it's leading to violence. In terms of water issues, what is the biggest water challenge Yemen faces today?
فيما يتعلق بقضايا المياه، ما هو أكبر تحدي تواجهه اليمن فيما يتعلق بالمياه اليوم؟
Could Yemen run out of water?
هل ممكن أنه تخلص المياه من اليمن؟
ممكن.
Yes, possible.
Could. Wow.
Constitutes an alarm clock moment for the world, because this report will tell us again that everything we thought we knew on climate change has actually been underestimated, that the effects of climate change will be upon us faster or intense fashion than we had thought.
We all know that human activities are changing the atmosphere in unexpected and in unprecedented ways.
And that the greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
The atmosphere and ocean have warmed. The amounts of snow and ice have diminished. Sea level has risen, and the concentrations of greenhouse gases have...
There is no more fire season. We have wildfires all year round.
Climate change, extreme weather, call it what you will, and our vulnerability to it.
The 12 years of drought has left the landscape bone dry.
We got any patriots in the crowd?
A new scientific report has determined the last decade was the warmest on record.
Our world is changing faster and more dramatically than ever before.
Getting to Bangladesh means a 12-hour flight from Los Angeles to Turkey, and then another 8-hour flight to Dhaka, the capital. I'm taking this trip because I've heard Bangladesh is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. I want to understand why. It's 6 a.m. when I finally arrive and meet Morshed Ali Khan, a journalist for the leading English-language newspaper here, the Daily Star. He's been reporting on Bangladesh for the last 3 decades, and he's kindly agreed to be my guide. As we drive into the heart of Dhaka, Morshed tells me it was once a small and quiet city, but not anymore.
So you've really seen this city expand and grow?
Oh yes, especially over the last 20 years, it's phenomenal growth, you know.
Yeah.
Every day
Right.
people coming from the rural areas.
Right.
So employment opportunities, economic growth, you know, in the city. And then climate is also playing a part in it. Water is creeping into people's homes and all this.
Right, right.
You will see over the next few days.
Do you think it would be possible to stop and just step out and
Yeah.
stretch our legs?
Sure, sure. Welcome to Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It's so alive.
It is alive, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
I wanted to get outside my bubble, definitely done that. After I catch up on a little sleep, I decide the first thing I need is a geography lesson. So I head to one of the largest river ports in the world to meet Dr. Atiq Rahman, one of the country's top climate scientists. Can you tell me what it is about the geography of Bangladesh that makes it uniquely vulnerable to climate change?
It's a play of water and land. Bangladesh is extremely flat, and it is the confluence of three of the mightiest river systems. It's a huge amount, trillions of cusecs of water passes through these.
When it comes to climate change, Atiq tells me that Bangladesh is geographically cursed. Sitting at the foot of the Himalayas, it's one of the flattest, lowest-lying countries in the world. Nearly a quarter of the land here is less than 7 feet above sea level. People in Bangladesh have a long history living with water. Some of the rivers are many miles wide, and the country has a 4-month rainy season known as the monsoon. Massive floods are common and have been for centuries. But global warming is making things even worse.
We need the flood for fertility of the land, but a little additional extra flood is what is disastrous. In the central plain, where all the three rivers meet, there has been a 15% increase of area covered by flood over the last 20 years.
Is that climate change?
It is consistent with all the predictions of climate change. Climate change is a shift in one direction, and there are lots of examples over the last 10, 15 years to show that it's going in one direction.
With 150-mile-an-hour winds, Cyclone Sidr was the worst storm to hit Bangladesh in years.
In southern Bangladesh, cyclones are also a fact of life. But lately, cyclones here are bigger, stronger, and more frequent.
Now 4 of them have come in 7 years. Now that's too much.
A combination of 2 cyclones, Sidr in 2007 and Ayla in 2009, left the country in ruins. Thousands of people died, and more than 1 million people became homeless. But the most shocking thing is what he tells me next.
Below that, all will be underwater.
By the end of this century, climate scientists project there will be a 3-foot rise in sea level. And the impact that will have is hard to comprehend.
So about 17% of the landmass, 13% of the present population will be inundated and affected by salt water.
That means some 20 million people in southern Bangladesh will be forced off their land by the year 2100. I can't imagine where they'll all go, but Atiq tells me that a lot of them will end up here in Dhaka. It's further inland and further away from the cyclones. And it turns out this climate migration has already started.
George Luber from the CDC tells me that in a world of rising temperatures, cities like Los Angeles are especially at risk. He wants to show me why some parts of this city are a magnet for heat, and he invites UCLA professor and atmospheric scientist Alex Hall along to help. They say that to really understand what heat can do on the ground, we need to be up high.
There's a tremendous amount of variation in how hot a neighborhood gets as a result of just the surface characteristics, the trees, the type of buildings, the color of the surface. You know, darker areas absorb more heat. This area has a lot less green space than the other areas we've been flying over. And that's going to Unfortunately,
so it's going to get hot quicker and it's going to hold on to the heat.
Holds it overnight, yeah.
So if there are more parks in a neighborhood, that neighborhood's going to be cooler.
Absolutely, yeah.
From up here, I realized just how much of LA is covered in concrete and blacktop. And it's the poorest neighborhoods that tend to have the fewest trees, which means they'll be hit the hardest. And according to Alex, climate change is going to make all this worse.
In Los Angeles, we project by mid-century, we're looking at extremely hot days happening maybe the equivalent of 30 days a year, increasing to something like 60, 90 days per year by mid-century if greenhouse gas emissions continue unabated. Right? That's a pretty big difference.
It's hard to imagine 2 to 3 months of extremely hot days. What does that mean for the people who live here? I find out about someone who thinks high temperatures are already affecting our health far more than we realize.
Come on, Arjun! That was a nice kick.
Dr. Rabbuh Basu, an epidemiologist at the California Environmental Protection Agency, has been studying heat waves for over a decade. Rabbuh's coming to LA to investigate a heat wave that hit here in July. She believes all sorts of health consequences linked to heat are being missed completely. She asks me to meet her at a clinic in South Central, where she says the heat is having a profound impact on pregnant women.
How you doing, Matt?
Rabbuh, hi.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. This is Fallon. Hi. Hi, so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Hey, Fallon, how you doing? Matt,
Hi.
nice to meet you. So what happened? Tell us your story.
Yeah, I was having early contractions.
Early, like how early?
29.
29 weeks, wow. Yeah.
I was feeling a bit queasy,
Mhm.
so I went to the bathroom, I threw up, I came back, and that's when the contractions started coming. And I'm like, okay, I have to go. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
So I went to the hospital, they admitted me, and I was just super dehydrated. So they ended up giving me 2 bags of saline to rehydrate me, stop the contractions, right?
Yeah. That happened to my wife, actually, with one of our kids. Yeah, heat wave here in LA. I was working here in LA, and she ended up in the hospital in 2 bags of fluid, same exact thing.
Sounds familiar to you.
2 bags.
Until just now, I'd never put 2 and 2 together, that it was actually the heat that caused this scary incident with my wife. Dr. Khan says heat waves increase the risk of getting dehydrated. And if you're pregnant, dehydration can make your body generate oxytocin, the hormone that triggers labor, even if you're not ready to give birth.
Okay. The problem with it is the triggers aren't that clear sometimes.
Right.
Patients don't always feel that they're starting to get dehydrated.
Right.
Especially when
that is what happened with my wife too. Like we thought we were doing everything right too, but it's insidious how you don't realize how much you're losing. Yeah, that's right. Do you see this a lot? Like
unfortunately, yeah. The problem is a lot of times patients don't identify this until they've been contracting for 2-3 hours. So we've seen it, yeah. It definitely goes up during summer and especially when the heat hits hard.
Dr. Khan isn't just worried about the immediate danger for babies who are born prematurely. There are also huge long-term risks, like cognitive delay, lower IQ, and learning disabilities. And Rabbuh says the hidden effects of heat go far beyond preterm labor. Her biggest concern is the number of people who might be dying. That's the real reason she came to LA. She thinks the death toll from that heat wave in July was far higher than what officials say. And she intends to prove it.
Soon after I arrive in Yemen, I'm reminded of how unstable this country is. These people are mourning a young political leader who was recently gunned down. Political violence is all too common here, and there's a big reason for Americans like me to care about what happens in Yemen, because this country is also home to the most active chapter of Al-Qaeda, which is why Yemen's water crisis is so frightening. Even in Yemen's capital, getting water isn't always as simple as turning on the faucet. Those who can afford it have water trucked to their homes. Others have to depend on public fountains or the charity of their local mosque. And the problem isn't just temporary. What the president told me seems to be true. According to experts, this could be the first country in the world to actually run out of water completely.
Just across this square. Hey, salam alaikum. Allah hamsa Allah.
I'm meeting with one of those experts, Kyle Foster, a development consultant who first came to Yemen 25 years ago as a Peace Corps volunteer and decided to stay.
The water that's used for drinking and for agricultural purposes is the reservoir groundwater, fossil water, that has been trapped underground for eons. I'm not willing to say it's going to run out tomorrow, but we're on a wing and a prayer.
So why is this well important?
It was, once a usable well.
So when they dug this well, how far would they have had to dig in order to hit water?
Yeah, these wells are about 50 to 60 meters, which was typical until maybe 30 years ago.
If they were digging it today, how far down would they have to go?
800 meters.
800 meters?
Even 1,000. Water from an underground reservoir is finite. There's an end to it somewhere. We don't know exactly where that end's going to be.
The same thing is happening to wells all over this country. According to Foster, the main culprits are population growth and mismanagement. Right now, climate change probably isn't playing a big role. But scientists do know that climate change will increase water scarcity in dozens of countries around the world, especially in large parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, as well as the southwestern United States. So what's happening in Yemen now could be a glimpse into our future. And that future is frightening. I'm joined by Abdul Rahman Al-Iryani, the president's advisor on climate change. He's taking me to a place where the struggle for water has turned deadly.
The trick about crossing streets in Dhaka is that you've got to be fearless, not look to the left or the right, and just keep going, hoping that no one hits you.
Yeah.
Because if you show any fear, you're dead.
Decisiveness is awarded.
Exactly.
I'm with Dr. Omar Rahman, a Harvard professor and vice chancellor of the independent university Bangladesh. He's an expert in demography, the study of how human populations grow and change. And he says Dhaka is changing at a startling rate because of migration.
Bangladesh is the size of Iowa.
Right.
And at 160, we are half the size population of the US, which is about 314 million. So think about all of the US being packed into Iowa, and that's kind of what you're...
What's the population of Dhaka?
It depends on where you define the boundaries, but it's somewhere between 15 to 20 million. It's now apparently the 6th largest megacity in the world, and it's the fastest growing megacity.
Is there any estimate as to what the population will or could eventually be?
Well, it's supposed to double in about 20 years. Now, whether it really reaches 40 million or not, we don't know.
Suddenly, the skies open, and we run for cover.
Come, wait inside till the rain...
Omar says it's not the season for rain, but lately, things have been out of whack. As we wait for the rain to stop, Omar explains that there are many factors behind Dhaka's mind-boggling growth. A big one is economic.
People have to move to the cities because that's where the jobs are, that's where the money is.
What are the primary industries?
We are now the 3rd largest garment exporter in the world. Most likely when you buy something, a shirt or a blouse, it's not surprising that it would be made in Bangladesh.
For decades, jobs have been a magnet, pulling millions of people to Dhaka. But in recent years, Omar has noticed something new. Rising seas and more intense storms in the south of the country are pushing people out of their homes and into this already overpopulated city.
Climate change is exacerbating all of this. It's happening much faster, and we are having to deal with it in a much shorter time frame.
Now, up to 2,000 people arrive here every single day, and the city is struggling to absorb them. Omar offers to show me what these new migrants are up against. I feel like I'm intruding, but Omar nudges me forward, saying that those who live here feel proud and honored to welcome guests.
Should I remove my shoes?
No, it's okay.
No?
As long as you don't go out further.
Hi.
Like 10 of them, but sometimes it goes up to 15. This would be considered a good living space in the city. And you can see it's not very much.
Yes. Thank you.
This is the communal kitchen.
Hello. Thank you.
কয়জন এখানে সব মিলে?
এখানে আছে
100 জনের মতো হবে? There's a tap there.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. Most places don't have a tap. This is potable water. This is from the water supply. They have electricity, a little bit of an outhouse there. This means that they're much more fortunate than most people. The new migrants wouldn't get any place anywhere near as good as this. Climate change affects the whole world, but we in Bangladesh are in the eye of the storm. I mean, it's sort of like being a canary in a mine in a way. I mean, it's going to happen to us earlier, and so how we adapt to it is going to be crucial in terms of teaching the rest of the world of how to deal with these issues.
After I say goodbye to Omar, I go for a walk. I feel like I'm seeing the city with new eyes. I'm still overwhelmed by the sheer number of people here, and it's hard to imagine what this place will be like when there are millions more. It also occurs to me that these Bangladeshis have done almost nothing to cause global warming, especially compared to an American like me. But it looks like they'll have to pay a much steeper price.
Rupa Basu is convinced the number of people who die from heat waves is much higher than anyone realizes. And she's in LA digging into a recent heat wave. The emergency room is where most death classifications get made. But Rupa says heat deaths can look a lot like run-of-the-mill heart attacks, respiratory problems, even diabetes. And in the hustle and bustle of the ER, doctors often don't make the connection to the temperature outside. Rupa asked ER doctor Mark Futternick to take a closer look at his records.
I pulled the patients that had died during the stretch of the latest heat wave to try to see if there were any heat-related trends. I saw a really interesting case that I thought in hindsight could have been heat-related, but there's no mention of that in the chart.
Right.
And so it's the case of an elderly man who had had a stroke, and they bring him into the hospital and his temperature is 102. But the assumption with an elderly person with a temperature of 102 is that they have sepsis, they have overwhelming infection. What I found interesting about this case is that there was a heat wave going on, and there was no real sign of infection except for the temperature.
And it's not just this one case. Futternick's records suggest a disturbing trend: spikes in major illnesses during heat waves. George Luber from the CDC says that to really understand how easy it is to misdiagnose a case of heat death, I need to visit the coroner's office.
What happens when somebody dies of a heat-related illness? What happens to the human body?
The body loses its ability to regulate its own temperature. And the biochemical processes that keep the human body going are kind of particular about temperature. The chemical processes don't work as well, the tissue starts to break down, and people get these very severe symptoms, including death.
And how fast can that happen? I mean, I ask only because I remember doing a movie about 12 years ago in Death Valley in July. I remember one of the rangers telling me that without water, if you just are left to your own devices in the middle of Death Valley, a perfectly healthy person can be in serious trouble. incredibly quickly.
We've certainly seen a few cases of people who are perfectly healthy to begin with, and for whatever reason, they go out in the very high heat and exercise vigorously and die. So yes, it can happen very quickly.
But George says an even bigger concern is when it happens slowly.
You might go outside on a day like today or another hot day and say, I'm okay, I can handle this for a few hours. But what many people don't realize is that long-term exposure, a day or two or three, really starts overwhelming. And even a healthy individual can underestimate their risk very easily. It's not like an earthquake. It's not like a tornado where that risk is immediate and sudden. It's cumulative. It's difficult to convey that risk to many people.
How many cases have you had this year, do you know, off the top of your head?
Well, as far as I know, we have not had any cases this year so far.
0 heat-related deaths? Is that what you actually believe, or do you think that we're actually underreporting the number of heat-related deaths there are?
Oh, I think we're very much underreporting them. In order to actually write it on the death certificate, we'd have to have some fairly solid evidence that it was heat-related.
It's a hard thing to be sure about, in other words.
Yes.
Every day, dozens of bodies arrive at the LA County Coroner's Office. And figuring out the cause of death isn't always easy.
Caretaker made a visit, no answer, made contact with apartment manager who called 911, decedent found on living room floor. No doctor information, no next of kin. She lived alone, was pretty warm yesterday, certainly warm today. We'll get some more information and maybe figure out what truly happened here.
Craig Harvey, the chief investigator here, says that oftentimes it's difficult to classify a death as heat-related, because by the time a body gets here, the trail is literally cold.
Unless the data is captured at the front end of the investigation, it's lost, because by the time the doctor does the examination, the body's going to have been refrigerated at about 39 degrees for the last 18 to 24 hours or so. We're obviously missing a lot.
The other problem Rupa and George learn is that most bodies never even come here. The cause of death is determined by a doctor, not the coroner's office.
There's about 60,000 deaths a year that occur in the county of Los Angeles. Approximately 20,000 will be reported to the coroner. 2/3 of the deaths that occur in this county we'll never see.
Even though the real numbers are hard to come by, the coroner's office is taking the threat heat waves pose to LA very seriously.
At some point, I think that we may well have a very bad heat wave and we may have a lot of deaths. That actually is one of the reasons why when we remodeled this building, we put in a much larger crypt than we need. So we usually have about 300 or so deceased people in the crypt, but it will hold up to 500.
I'm beginning to believe that George and Rupa are right, that more people die of heat than we realize. But how many? Rupa says she's closing in on a number for the heat wave that hit LA just this past July.
So where exactly are we heading now?
We are going straight south from Sana'a, about 200 kilometer distance, to Drought City, which is the second biggest city in Yemen. This city was the first city really to run out of water. They are getting the water now between 30 and 40 days. They get it for one day or 2 days.
And then I have to wait 30 or 40 more days for water to come out.
To get it again, yes.
And what do I do in between?
The rest of the time they have to buy from tankers at a very high cost. We We are going to Mount Sabr, which is above the city of Taz, and there is an ancient spring, and there is a conflict between two villages about the spring. Just yesterday there were some killings also.
So they actually got in a gunfight over who controls the spring?
Yeah, fighting. Last time they used even bazookas and heavy machine guns. This is very common actually. Close to 60% of all rural conflicts, the main cause is water.
Wow.
As we touch down, I'm shocked that a city this big could really be running out of water.
What part of the country would you describe this as? Are we north? Are we?
It's south of the north.
So central Yemen? Are we?
Central Yemen.
Yeah.
Central Yemen.
And the village where the fighting was?
It's two villages. One is called Quraba, Qradh,
and the other was?
Al-Marzuh. This is the no man's land between Quraba and Marzuh. And from here, I can throw a stone to Marzuh and another stone to Quraba. It's only, what, 400 meters apart or less, 300 meters, huh? I think that water scarcity make people crazy.
First, I meet with the leaders of Al-Marzuh to understand how the conflict became so violent.
Can I see your dagger? That's really cool. Whoa, that is that's a piece of work. I hope it's only used to cut fruit.
It's only decoration.
Gotcha. Let's keep it that way. Is Ahmed actually one of the official leaders from Marzuh, or is he just a spokesman?
Yeah, he is the sheikh, and he is the spokesman.
Gotcha.
منذ 13 عام كان نشب الحرب أو المشكلة فيما بيننا وبين الإخوة في قرضة.
13 years ago, this conflict started.
الإخوة في قرضة إخواننا باختصار شديد بغوا علينا فقاموا بتفجير الخزانات التي عملتها الدولة بما يقارب ب20 مليون ريال وفصلوا القصبة التي كانت تابعة للمرزح وضموا الماء كامل إلى قرضة.
Next, I meet the leaders of Qarada.
كبير يعني ما كان فيش مشكلة في قبل عشرات السنين.
What he's saying is that the people were living for hundreds of years without any conflict. It's only recently because too many people and too little amount of water.
الآن ما عاد في إلا الثلث الآن الماء الموجود الثلث على ما كان بقبل السنوات السابقة.
بسبب المطر يعني.
بسبب المطر نعم.
بسبب الأمطار.
He's saying that 1/3 of the spring is still on. 2/3 is gone.
ابني كان متواجد بعرس تقريبا الساعة 9 بالليل. وقعت رصاصة من الجهة المقابلة من المرزوح دخلت بالطاقة بالزجاج صدمت بالعمود وقعت لفوق القلب حقه.
How old was he?
كم عمره؟
22 سنة.
كان عمره 22 years.
So he was a casualty of this water conflict.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry.
أولاً أحس بألم ما قد وصفه الناس ولا كتبوا الكتب. ولا أشتي أحد يصاب بهذا المصاب.
I'm starting to understand how climate change is tipping the scales for people who are already facing difficult odds. And now, I'm on my way to meet with someone who's studied that effect up close.
Hello.
Hi. Tasneem. Michael.
Welcome to Dhaka.
Thank you.
So have you been to a rickshaw before?
No, this is my first time.
Okay.
Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui is a political science professor at the University of Dhaka. She is also the founder of its Refugee and Migration Division, an organization that fights for migrants' rights.
How is the issue of climate change intersected with your work with migration?
It's very complicated. We thought that it has to be studied and found out how much is it migration, is climate stress related, and how much of it is, other types of migration.
Tasneem found that 75% of the migrants in her study moved partly because of climate-related events, which had affected their ability to make a living back home.
Their livelihood isn't sustainable. So therefore, they come to Dhaka so that they can have a proper income. But living standard is very bad. They don't want to stay here.
I got a sense of the living conditions yesterday. But Tasneem says an even bigger concern is the working conditions for migrants. Many of them end up getting jobs in the country's $20 billion garment industry, where they often work for less than $2 a day in extremely unsafe factories. Proof of that is what happened just last year, not far from here, at the Rana Plaza garment factory.
In Bangladesh tonight, there is a desperate search for survivors after a clothing factory collapsed.
Rana Plaza made clothes for many top Western brands. To increase production, the owner illegally added floors and crammed people in.
More than 3,000 factory workers were inside when the building collapsed Wednesday.
377 people were killed. 551 bodies have now been removed from the ruins of the 8-story building.
More than 1,000 workers died in what is now considered one of the worst industrial accidents in history.
So, Tasneem, where are you taking me now?
Oh, I'm taking you to meet climate migrant Shahidul Islam.
And why is he at a rehabilitation center?
I was following him for quite a while. He was working in Rana Plaza, and now he's taking therapy here in this center. He's under treatment.
What does Rana Plaza have to do with climate change?
Oh, Rana Plaza actually doesn't have anything to do with climate, but those who migrate, they end up in jobs like this, where security and other things are not ensured. So that is why he's here.
Right.
Shahidul's injuries are hard to look at. I feel unprepared.
The more I learn, the more it seems like heat is a silent killer, one that's difficult to trace. But sometimes there are hints of just how deadly heat waves can be. I stumble across a story of a teenager in Atlanta who succumbed to the heat.
A year ago today, Forrest Jones died of heat stroke. Tonight, family and friends gathered to remember Jones.
I've heard of rare cases like this, where young high school athletes die on the field. But then I find out there were 4 other kids that died in the Southeast within the same 2-week period. I'd never heard of anything like that before. It turns out heat is the leading cause of death for high school athletes. Among football players, the number of deaths has tripled over the last 20 years.
In memory of Forrest Glenn Jones.
Forrest Jones died during one of the hottest summers anyone can remember in this part of the country.
They put his chair up front, took his jersey out of the frame box, and then dripped it over his seat. They did a lot for him.
The heat exposure that eventually killed Forrest may have started days before he collapsed. It gradually overwhelmed him. But nobody noticed the signs. They thought he was just tired from practice.
I received a phone call. I was laying in the bed, and my daughter came and woke me up, and she said that Forrest had collapsed at school. I didn't think nothing of it at the time. I just thought maybe a little bit hot, and then he collapsed, and he's all right. And the time I get up there, he'd be all right. But it wasn't all right. But when I got to the hospital, I seen him there laying on the stretcher, and I went over to him and I touched his hand, and when I touched his hand, his eyes opened up and he says, "Daddy, I'm falling."
Forrest's story drives home just how dangerous it is when we don't take heat seriously. By the time I catch up again with Rupa, she's crunched the numbers and come to a conclusion about how many people might have actually died here in LA during the most recent heat wave. To arrive at this number, Rupa collected death records from every imaginable source and looked for heart attacks, aneurysms, strokes, all the cases that might be heat deaths in disguise. What she found was a big spike in those cases as the thermometer climbed. After some simple statistics to eliminate other possible causes, she had her number.
So I just looked at the period from June 15th till about July 15th. Looking at the numbers, we basically found that there were about 170 deaths, excess deaths during this time.
Excess deaths, so 170 more people died.
Yeah.
Just over this 1 month, but
Yeah.
primarily in this kind of 5-day chunk of time.
And just in Los Angeles.
And just in LA.
Yeah, so.
Wow. So 170 people just here, just for that short amount of time. I mean, if you think about the world, all the cities and the thousands and thousands of cities in the world.
And think of the extreme temperatures.
Right.
And
right, that's just this summer. Right, that's
yeah.
Which is not what we're talking about in the future.
And this
wow.
and this heat wave, while it was severe, there's definitely been other heat waves even more severe, and we're going to probably see more of that in the future.
Rupa tells me that heat waves in the United States already kill more people than hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, in fact, more than all extreme weather events combined. And that's based on the official numbers. Her research suggests that heat is actually killing thousands more. We just don't know about it. And if that seems hard to believe, consider what's been happening in the rest of the world.
Europe is experiencing some of the highest temperatures recorded there in the last 150 years.
In 2003, an unprecedented heat wave struck Europe, killing up to 70,000 people.
So many people have died that undertakers are storing bodies in a refrigerated warehouse.
Around the same time, India had deadly heat waves 2 summers in a row that claimed the lives of thousands. And during a heat wave in Russia and Eastern Europe in 2010, 55,000 were killed.
Russia is sweltering through its hottest summer in living memory.
And the really scary part, climate scientists say these events will become more and more frequent as global warming intensifies.
It's the worst heat wave to hit China in 140 years, leaving dozens of people dead.
Australia is a nightmare.
The death toll at least 170 and rising.
As many as 10,000 people may have died.
Climate scientists say what would be considered an extremely hot event now, one so hot it only comes once every 20 years, will happen every other year by the end of the century.
This is my last stop before I leave Yemen, the hospital where the latest victim of the water conflict is recovering.
Well, this is Mohammed Qaid, who is from Qarada. He was hit with 3 bullets maybe 3-4 days ago, and he survived.
قربوا لي الغداء غدي. أزهد على طلقة نار من الطاقة لشق جسمي وناقص مكان. بينما هم معاهم نواظير.
You have binoculars, these see people.
So it's like a sniper.
Sniper, يعني إنه قناص.
All over a fight over what?
هذا كله بسبب الماء. ما فيش حاجة ثانية. سياسة.
منصور إخوان ولا بحق
There is no politics or anything. Just all just for the water. That's what he's saying.
We need to leave him rest. Thank you very much. Feel better.
As we depart, I'm still finding it hard to believe what's happening here, even though I've seen it with my own eyes. In America, when we think about the roots of violence, we think about struggles for money and power, or clashes over religion and ideology. But to me, there is something uniquely terrifying about people killing each other over something as fundamental as water, because that is a fight for survival. And if Yemen is a preview of what climate change has in store for other parts of the world, it could become a fight for survival on a terrifying scale.
He's saying that we are next to Rana Plaza. One day there was the building where I used to work. Now nothing is there. Nothing is there. I don't know how God saved me.
What do you remember from that day?
আমার শেষ নিঃশ্বাস ওখানে শেষ করব বলে আমি আল্লাহর কাছে প্রার্থনা করছিলাম। আমি নড়াচড়া করে আমার পাওয়াটা বের করব। এমন কোনো পরিস্থিতি ছিল না, উপায় ছিল না।
He's saying hours after hours he was shouting that please help me, even if you have to chop my leg off, do that, but I want to see the world. I want to be alive. So then they really worked with him for 3 hours to take out all the rods from his body, and then they rescued him.
How much time passed between the building's collapse and your being found?
After 8 hours. He had a person who already expired just beside him.
Because of his injuries, Shahidul can't do a physical job anymore. He'll need to find a career where he can sit down.
He's not feeling good. He doesn't want to be here anymore.
Yeah, let's get out of here.
At the rehab center, he's learning to use a computer. Given everything he's been through, I'm amazed by his optimism, drive, and hope. When we sit down together, I want to finally hear the story of why Shahidul left his home in the south.
আল্লাহ সিডার বারবারই হওয়ার কারণে আমাদের দেশে আমাদের গ্রামে অনেক ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়, ফ্যামিলিরা অনেক কষ্টের পরে চলে। আমার নিজে প্ল্যান করলাম যে আমি তো বাবার একটু হেল্প করার দরকার, আমি অনেক বড় হয়েছে।
Is there any chance that any of your 4 younger siblings will choose or be required to migrate as well?
হতে পারে। তাহলে আমার তো অ্যাক্সিডেন্টের জন্য আমি এই হেল্পটা করতে পারবো কিনা এটা তো শিওর না। একটা ছোট ভাই আছে আমার।
ছোট ভাই আছে।
How old is he now?
11 বছর।
11. He's now 11, but gradually he might have to.
Yes. When you first came, did you miss being home, and do you miss it now?
So he missed his mother the most. That's all Bengalis will miss.
You could argue that Shahidul was a victim of bad luck, being in that factory on that day, being in the path of the 2 cyclones that forced him to leave his home. But how can you argue that climate change isn't stacking the deck against people like him? And now, I want to see what life is really like where Shahidul came from, in the South, which I'm starting to think of as the front line in this country's battle against climate change.
I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to take me to your village. I would love to visit.
তো ও অনুরোধ করতেছে তুমি কি ওকে ওর গ্রামে তোমার গ্রামে নিয়ে যাবা এটা দেখার জন্য?
হ্যাঁ নিয়ে যাব।
জোরে বলো।
নিয়ে যাব।
He will take you to his village. And তাকে ধন্যবাদ না তোমার সাথে কথা বলার জন্য।
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Shahidul leaves first. I'll meet back up with him in a few days. A bus ride home would take him over 10 hours. So I bought him a plane ticket that will get him there in 45 minutes. It will be his first time on a plane, and probably the best $60 I've ever spent.
In a perfect world, death would never be. Love would be forever and last eternity. In a perfect world, you'd still be by our side, lighting up our happy lives. You never would have died.
Your children are supposed to bury you, not supposed to bury your children. The weather is changing. I mean, it's getting hotter. It's definitely getting hotter. That's the lesson, that we need to know that heat will take it away from you.